Hello, everyone. This is Star Snovia here. Um, I think I might have fucked up when it comes to scheduling it because I was intended to start at 10:30, but fuck it, I decided to start early because whatever. It's been a while since I've done a Star Wars related stream, haven't I? Now, for those of you who who have not ventured outside of the Star Wars films, shows, or whatever, this is strictly an expanded universe discussion. So I'm not going to discuss anything that the Disney shows are doing currently, simply because that's a different discussion for a different time and for a different stream. And considering, fuck it. Um, I think I've neglected my Star Wars content. I truly have. Because I know there's those who come to my channel strictly for Star Wars, and I have not been delivering that at all. Now, doesn't mean I have to always just do Star Wars content, but yeah, fucking Christ. 4 months since I've done a Star Wars stream. 4 months. Now, I can't promise this my schedule when it comes to Star Wars stuff will be consistent. I do have expanded universe reviews on my computer, literally. I just have to edit the fucking things, which sucks. Some of them I've been sitting there for almost 3 years. That has to do with my Knights of the Old Republic comic reviews, which ever since I switched the format, part of me has basically I've considered it's going back to showing my face on camera when I review the comics, simply because if I don't talk about the art of the comic, I can't really review the fucking thing. So I think for the Knights of the Old Republic comic review, when it eventually gets uploaded, I'm just gonna fucking put one image and just if you hear me talk about a certain panel, but I don't show anything, it's because fuck it, it needs to get out there. So my comic reviews from going forward, when I get started on it, I'm just going to do it the easier way. Show my face on camera, talk about the comic. Boom. I could talk about the story. I could talk about the art, and vice versa. What I liked and didn't like. So going forward, my book reviews are still going to be pre-recorded, and I'm still not going to show my face on camera when I do the books. But the comics, to me, it's too much of a pain in the ass to go through all the fucking editing on my whatever thing I fucking use. With that piece of shit Windows Movie Maker, which I haven't used in ages, or my current editing program, which I can't use right now because, well, I lost my job and unfortunately, I'm unable to renew the license for it at the moment. So I'm kind of stuck. So when I do get around to it, if you see a lot of Star Wars reviews get pumped out one after the other, it's because I have reviews literally fucking sitting on my computer. Yeah, Windows Movie Maker sucks. It really does. It fucking sucks. In fact, for those of you who've watched my Star Wars Expanded Universe reviews, back in 2018, I was having problems. The audio for my reviews were awful. It was all over the place. In my reviews, I had it was really weird how the audio worked. It was a little bit ahead of what the actual footage I was like playing. I tested the video without Windows Movie Maker, and it was fine. It's just when you edited Windows Movie Maker, the audio was all fucked up. Because all of you know, I have an intro for my Star Wars reviews. I've had an intro since 2016, and I don't want to remove something that's been a staple of my review series. So until I'm able to renew that program that I use, my reviews are just not going to come out, unfortunately. I guess you could look forward when I eventually get around to it. of a lot of unreleased Star Synovia content. I have a lot of fucking content. A lot. Star Trek reviews, Star Wars reviews, vice versa. But then again, I'm talking about the Star Wars expanded universe here. So even though I've done some videos dedicated to the EU before, everyone who knows me as a Star Wars fan knows I'm the EU guy. So when Star Wars for me is the EU, it's not the movies, it's not Ahsoka, it's not Mandalorian, it's not Rebels, it's not Clone Wars. Well, Clone Wars, whatever fucking Clone Wars I'm talking about. Most of you who didn't watch the 2003 Clone Wars knows what I'm talking about. But to clarify, TCW for short. The EU to me is what Star Wars is. Because I feel like a lot of the best ideas from Star Wars come from the EU. From the ships, the planets, the storylines, the structure of the governments, the structure of the military, all that stuff is EU. And I don't like giving credit to George Lucas strictly for everything that is good about Star Wars or Dave Filoni. I know I'm going to piss off some Filoni people who think Dave Filoni is the greatest thing in Star Wars. Without the EU, Dave Filoni would not have all those good things in the Clone Wars TV series or Rebels or Ahsoka or Mandalorian. All of that stuff is pulled from the EU. Everything good about those shows comes from the EU. Like, the EU was the first to truly make Star Wars feel more like a real life universe outside of a simple space fantasy story of good versus evil. Because before Timothy Zahn wrote his Thrawn novels in the 1990s, which ironic, as I'm doing this podcast, I'm currently reading the second book of the Thrawn trilogy, Dark Force Rising. And it is amazing. Like a lot of stuff that some Star Wars fans just do not like about the prequels, like the politics of Star Wars, started with the Thrawn trilogy. It all started with the Thrawn trilogy. Like, the politics of the Republic started in the fucking Thrawn trilogy because Timothy Zahn is very good at writing political drama. He's very good at writing character drama and military drama too. And I think that, to me, is what is Star Wars is to me. The original trilogy, to me, it's a product of its time. It's a classic. I don't think they're bad movies. Don't get it twisted. I don't hate the original trilogy, but there's only so much that can be done with these films. The original Star Wars movies, there's only like 6 hours of content in total. And if you just compare the original trilogy to the prequels, which I'm just doing another thing, I think the prequels are just far more interesting than the original trilogy. The thing that the original trilogy did do, though, was it was a great building block. It was a great sandbox, because without the original trilogy, a lot of my favorite Star Wars stories would not exist. It's just a fact. Like, there's this one scene in A New Hope. I'm pretty sure all of you know what I'm talking about here. You know, with the cantina and Mos Eisley. They made an entire book on that, and I reviewed it years ago. I'm probably going to revisit that book one day, though they're short stories. Basically, okay, what were these people, the inhabitants of this one fucking place on Tatooine? What were they doing during the events of A New Hope? Of course, before and during and even after A New Hope. That is what was interesting about the EU, because the small, most minor things you saw on screen in the original trilogy, it's like there was some cool stuff you can tell. Like, example, like I cannot say this without laughing my ass off. Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi, there's an entire book that has short stories that actually tells us, okay, what is the story behind this place? And I think the greatest thing about Star Wars, this goes for the prequels too, but I'm mostly talking about the original trilogy, back when the EU was basically at its infancy. they went fucking crazy with it. Like all the stuff in Star Wars, you have these locations that only appear in one or two scenes in the movies, and you have, in some instances, an entire book based around them. Like an entire book that focuses on a small scene in A New Hope, the Mos Eisley's cantina. That one scene that Luke, Obi-Wan, they're only there for like a few minutes, yet you have an entire book on it called Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina. And for those of you, if you want to read some really good short stories about some stuff that happens in A New Hope and you don't really want to read a full-fledged novel, you just want to read about the underworld of Star Wars or the stuff that focuses more on the inhabitants of Tatooine, Mos Eisley Cantina is a great read. Man, I wish I would have gotten into more detail because there's some good stories. It even actually explains about Greedo. Yeah, fucking Greedo, a minor character in A New Hope that just gets shot by Han Solo. He has a short story. Even though it's later contradicted in later sources, I don't care. I thought it was a good story, and I would have loved to see that adapted in some form in the future on screen. It was a really good story, and it was based on some minor background character. That was the thing that was awesome. Of course, you have other stuff in the EU. And by the way, I haven't read everything. It's unfortunate that a lot of these short stories, they're out of print. You can't find them. Yet you basically had to go basically have every Star Wars insider in order to get all these short stories, because there's many of them that have never gotten a release. Because in the 1990s, some of these short stories were reprinted in other forms, like the Star Wars journals, which were short stories, or some of them were novella in length. They were reprinted in collections. We don't have collections anymore, unfortunately, for short stories regarding Star Wars, and that's a shame because there's a lot of great works of Star Wars I haven't even heard of. I guess you could consider it a form of lost media because majority of it that has not been reprinted. Oh yeah, they are. It really is. But another thing about the EU that's really good that I don't think the on-screen stuff has been able to do, it shows us different systems of government. It doesn't just show us like just one system of government like the original trilogy does, which I'm mainly talking about the original trilogy because the era of the EU that I'm basically focusing on, at least in terms of my reading right now, is the era that basically inspired the post-Return of the Jedi expanded universe. So, in a way, the original trilogy era, in terms of the EU, would probably be my favorite because the Thrawn trilogy and then the stuff that followed the Thrawn trilogy, those are my favorite stories in the Star Wars franchise. And for me, I just have to talk about the original trilogy in depth when it comes to that. Hell, the EU basically set a standard when it came to novelizations, which I don't think Star Wars has been able to match. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, who didn't grow up with Star Wars during the 1990s or the late 1990s to early 2000s, the prequel Star Wars novels, which are novelizations, they weren't like your ever the mail novelization that was released at the time. Because novelizations of films, when they were released, they just felt like a substitute for the movie. Like a lot of them just really weren't really noteworthy. There wasn't really much of note to even talk about in the novelizations or even go to. It's like just why read the novel? Just watch the movie. Yeah, the novelizations, you may get some deleted scenes here and there, or some scenes that were never filmed, like in the Terminator 2 novelization, or you get more detail about what a character is thinking during a certain situation. Novelizations before Star Wars and Star Trek were take it or leave it. Now, I can't talk about the Star Trek novelizations if anybody asks me because I just don't know about Star Trek novelizations. I tend to prefer to read the original stuff in the Star Trek literary verse. Same thing with the Star Wars expanded universe as well. The original trilogy novelizations, there's little reason to really read them unless you're just curious about what certain scenes were like that were cut that were never added into the movie. And this is something I will say, even though I despise the Last Jedi, it is probably one of the best novelizations to exist for Star Wars, simply because the amount of material it added in there. The only reason I'm bringing this up because what a novelization, in my opinion, it should be so good it should stand on its own. And I think that is what made the prequel novelizations as good as they were. And I've read them all. You probably can look at my reviews. Some of them were so good, they were better than the movie. And I'm talking about Revenge of the Sith. The Revenge of the Sith novelization, if anybody wants to experience Revenge of the Sith in a new and interesting way, that is the way to do it. The novelization of Revenge of the Sith is quite a trip. Not to mention Matthew Stover. Oh my God, when he writes like characters in his novels, he's amazing. Like Anakin's fall to the dark side and the Revenge of the Sith novelization was some of the best character writing ever for Anakin Skywalker. And for me, you don't understand Revenge of the Sith until you've read the novelization. I'm not saying you have to read it, but if you really want to see Revenge of the Sith in a different light, it is. If you don't want to read the novelizations for the other films, Revenge of the Sith is a must. Because not only does it have a lot of EU connections, even if you don't know the EU connections or understand them, I think it's worth a read. Matthew Stover does a really good job of, explaining like things, and not to mention ask not tell when it comes to the reader. It's basically left for interpretation what you think is going on in the novelization. Like Anakin's constantly being challenged in his worldview, like Palpatine like challenges him on everything, his beliefs. Like Anakin's gradual fall to the dark side is told beautifully in the novelization. Now, I understand books and movies, they're different mediums. But the novelization is so good, you don't have to ever watch Revenge of the Sith if you've read the novelization. You really don't, because it does an amazing job of giving character development to Anakin Skywalker. And that is basically why, if you love Anakin Skywalker as a character and you want to see a different way of his tragic fall, the novelization is, you cannot go wrong with it. It is a great book. And yes, it's probably, out of all the novelizations of the original 6 films, it is the one that you cannot really fit it in the new canon. There's too many references to like various materials in the EU, like Clone Wars multimedia projects, some post Return of the Jedi stuff. Of course, for me, you don't need to read it, but if you want to experience it in a new and interesting way, you should read the novelization. Though you should read all the novelizations for the prequels, because it enhances the films. If when you watch the films after reading the novelizations, it will give you a different perspective on them. I am not talking about any of the new stuff in this stream, actually. This is strictly EU, because, it's what I like to talk about. Yeah, that's something you should do. And you know what? I'm just gonna say this. To hell with it. Anyone, if anybody truly wants to preserve the EU, every single part of it should be preserved. Fuck this. Oh, if you don't pay for it legally, you can't have the right to read it. No, there's so much material in the expanded universe that it's becoming lost media at this point. From those short stories that Alex Starr just mentioned, the journals, the Young Jedi Knight series, Junior Jedi Knights, Galaxy of Fear, all that stuff, and not to mention Jedi Apprentice. All this should be archived. They should not. None of it should be allowed to become out of print and forever inaccessible to the unless you have an insane amount of money to buy some questionable condition um, of any books. Some of the books I have are not in the best condition, mind you. Like one of the Young Jedi Knight books, it's a miracle the binding for the hardcover hasn't fallen apart. Oh, whatever. I'm ignoring you. It's like, yeah, I agree. But to me, I'm not talking about the new canon because I really don't. I don't want to talk about the new canon because I kind of want to keep this a friendly talk with EU stuff. Though I will talk about the new canon at a different time. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep up with everything. The multimedia project of Clone Wars. Oh God. If that to be real, I guess I should mention this because one of the most contentious things when it comes to the Clone Wars era is the multimedia project and TCW. To me, I just don't care. I just don't care. The Clone Wars era of any era in general is a nightmare if you're trying to fit everything in chronological order. To me, I just read the stories I want to read and just move on and view both stories as something to be enjoyed separately. I think Lucasfilm really dropped the ball on that one. I know this is something that people who know me for years, who've watched me, who followed me, are like, so Darth Sinovia doesn't really care. I don't. I mean, it shouldn't shock anyone. I mean, I followed like all these groups that bitch and moan about this canon shit. It's like, okay, none of this stuff that I'm talking about is even canon, but yet I still enjoy it all the same. Would I want some some of this stuff to be, I don't know, explained? Well, there is a get out of jail free card. Fantasy Flight gave us something that made it possible to ignore the Clone Wars with little issues. To me, I just see Clone Wars. I'm referring to Clone Wars by 2008. Any contradiction in that show is just Imperial propaganda. That's how I look at it. I mean, the way the show starts, every episode literally starts off as a propaganda like piece, like in the style like you would see in old World War II advertisements or anything. If you were to go to the movie theater back in the 40s, like the style that it's done, like that's how I interpret it. It's just a TV show that aired like during the Imperial era when the Empire was running the galaxy. That's how I view the Clone Wars. I mean, it's whatever. It's headcanon, yeah. Is it valid? No. Do I care? Absolutely not. I mean, I'm beyond caring. Though, which brings up the question, though, since we really don't know what happens to Ahsoka in the EU or Maul. How do we explain what happened to them, their fates, or any other character? We don't know their final destinations. Honestly, I just have simple answers. I'm not going to go elaborate because, to me, honest, I don't really care. In the EU, Ahsoka dies sometime after Order 66. Rex, he like, I don't know, he retired somewhere. Maybe it just whatever with his clone troopers. Maybe he defected, just like the clones commandos did at the end of Karen Travis's Republic Commandos. He left and went to Mandalore, retired, and just died a peaceful life. Darth Maul, Old Wounds is basically his canon ending, so I don't care. Simple. I just solved all the problems. Asajj Ventress, well, her fate is the same as the EU. Nobody's going to change my mind, and that's basically my explanation because it's too exhausting. Luckily, my favorite era of Star Wars is post Return of the Jedi, so Clone Wars doesn't affect it really that much. Yeah, there's some minor things like, oh, well, how do you explain Dathomir? Again, you could argue that it's a stylistic choice or it's Imperial propaganda. Anyway, I don't know. I just don't really care. It's like we're like approaching the 10th anniversary of the EU being non-canon. God, I feel old just thinking about that. Fuck. And it's so stupid even still having this discussion. Is there still an alliance to preserve the expanded universe on Facebook? Anyone that's still on Facebook, oh God, you have to be a fucking boomer to actually. You have to be a fucking boomer to still go on Facebook. Is there still freaking an alliance to preserve the expanded universe group? Do they still exist? Do they? I don't know. Answer below. If there's one thing, though, I will say, I actually think Legacy of the Force gets undeserved hate by the Star Wars fandom. Yeah, it's not my favorite story in the post-Return of the Jedi era. For at least to me. But I actually have to give credit where credit's due. It's stupid. It's like it's a fucking religious cult at this point. A miracle. They still exist. Restoring the EU should have never been a goal for this group, for any EU fan. Preserving the EU should always be the goal. Because why restore the fucking EU? Okay, we restored the EU. Okay, then what? Okay, like, oh God, I can't. Okay, you know what? I'm fuck it. I'm gonna go on a tangent anyway. Does anyone want to fucking the EU to be in the same quality as the High Republic? Now, I'm probably one of the few people here that's ever engaged with that trash. No, I don't think so. The fact that the EU is dead is a good thing. In fact, what they did was a mercy killing. Because who knows how much worse things could have got if they kept it going with under Disney, even if they still did the new canon anyway. Who knows? I agree. I would like that. I don't even want to talk about the problem with Mora Jade making her canon is you would change. Okay, to be honest, Luke Skywalker is an important part of her story, and I don't care what anyone says. I'm just going to say this: if you're not going to have her be Luke's love interest in some extent, or as whatever she becomes his wife, or whatever, then you might as well not use the character. I don't care what anyone says. Mora Jade, the most important thing about her character is Luke Skywalker. And the fact that she overcame her bitterness and hate towards him at the end of the Thrawn trilogy, and then towards the end of her arc at the end of Vision of the Future, where she agrees to marry him, I just feel like it's poetic in a way. And I feel like you cannot really do Mora Jade in canon. You really can't. honestly, the ship has already sailed. If they want to do Mora Jade in canon, then they should not have let fucking Rian Johnson do what he wanted with Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. He should not have fucking. They should not have allowed him to do what he wanted. They really wanted to use Mora Jade. And to be honest, consider how Timothy Zahn is. Do I really want them to bring her back? Now, I'm currently reading through the Thrawn Ascendancy book. I'm on the last one of the trilogy. Good stuff. I just have a feeling if they allowed Timothy Zahn to canonize Mora Jade, or he would probably make her into a Mary Sue. That's kind of what I feel like, because Timothy Zahn got all butthurt when she was killed off in Legacy of the Force, even though he really did not write her character. Like, since Vision of the Future, I'm talking about post Return of the Jedi for many years. And I'm just going on a tangent here. I don't think Timothy Zahn is the best writer for Mora Jade. I think the writers that came after Timothy Zahn, I actually think wrote her character better. I think her character was far more interesting when other writers wrote her than Timothy Zahn. I don't hate Timothy Zahn. Don't get that twisted. I just don't think Timothy Zahn is as good as a lot of fans says he is. Honestly, yeah. I'm not for canon or for Legends at this point. I'm just for Star Wars, and the EU is Star Wars to me. And, well, if by some unlikely scenario the EU ever gets brought back in some form, whether it's a limited continuation or whatever, or it does get continued, which it won't happen. But if I were to make a choice, what I would do for the EU to continue the EU post Crucible, because that's the only era I give a shit about. I don't care about. I'm just gonna say this. I don't care about Karen Travis's Republic Commandos novels to get concluded. I think Order 66 was a good ending point for her series, and I don't think we needed another installment. And if she's not going to write it anyway, what's the point of even ending that series? I don't care for The Force Unleashed 3 because there should never have been a second one. And Dawn of the Jedi, I don't really care either. The Old Republic, just let the people at BioWare continue that story whatever way they want. The only thing I care about is post-Crucible. Now, how would I approach such a story? Personally, if I were to do a limited continuation after Crucible, I personally would have basically no more than 18 books, and that's just it. And I think you could have like majority of those books be trilogies. In my opinion, I think having it be a series of trilogies would be a good way to end the story. Of course, in my opinion, how you could do this is you have it happen in the span of decades. That way, any particular storyline that is left hanging can be resolved. Like Ben Skywalker's storyline and Bizarra Kai, their thing can be resolved. You don't have to like spend an endless amount of time doing that, because let's be real with ourselves. Anything more than 18 books for the post Crucible era is excessive, because how many stories can you tell between Crucible and the first issue of the Legacy comics? Just how many issues can you how many books can you do it for? So in my opinion, I personally don't think like we should do anything past 18 books. You know, we may not even have to do 18 books, but no more than 18. At least to me. And as for the comics, I think one thing I would have done for Abeloth, I would not have the Abeloth stuff be resolved within Luke's generation. I'd actually move it so it's resolved within Cade's generation. That way, you could have had the final ending of the Skywalker saga in the EU happen during Cade Skywalker's time. So you have a way to give a definitive ending to the Skywalker saga. And for me, another thing that I would do as well is I actually don't know if people would like this idea. Maybe you have the Sith and the Jedi at the very end of the EU timeline. By the way, this is if you're going to end Star Wars permanently. I'm talking about the EU. You basically have it end this way. You don't really have to tell any stories after it. You basically have the last of the Jedi and the last of the Sith. It doesn't have to be Skywalkers if you want to do a post whatever story. It could be have to do with Abeloth. They decide that this war they've been waging for thousands of years hasn't been worth it, and it's all it has done is just destroyed like the galaxy around them, their cultures, and they're not really doing anything. They cannot actually defeat each other. The Jedi defeat the Sith will rise again. The Sith defeat the Jedi will rise again. And I think a poetic ending is for the Jedi and the Sith to actually forge a peace. And in my opinion, you could basically leave it for interpretation. How does this peace last or not? I don't know. That's just one proposed ending. That, by the way, I'm going by Cade's era, where you could actually have this happen, and you could put this as a definitive ending point. You don't have to have the Jedi kill the Sith completely. You could just have the two orders forge a peace between each other. Though what would cause them to do so is another question. Do you do it through Abeloth or you do it through another villain? I say Abeloth because there's nobody that I think of that's a better entity to unite the Jedi and the Sith than Abeloth. Yeah, it's just so stupid. But I don't have the thing I like about the EU is it continued the tradition that George Lucas actually pushed in Star Wars. It's a Skywalker saga. Not Skywalker. Okay, I fucked that up. One thing that is constant in Star Wars, and I think it's important, whether they're Skywalkers or not, the main theme, and the thing that's been missing, and why the Disney era just is not as appealing outside of maybe stuff that Filoni does, is family. Whether it's found family or blood family, it doesn't matter. And I think that is what made Star Wars stand out. That's what made Star Wars stand the test of time for almost 50 years. Is family. The themes of family is strong in Star Wars. And the sequel trilogy goes against that theme in every turn. Could you have done a good story with Rey, her finding a family with the characters that were introduced in the sequels? Yeah, you could have told a good story. But the people who worked on the sequels just don't understand what Star Wars is. And the EU, when I go back to it from time to time, I can't help but miss what Star Wars used to be. Even the stuff that is bad, it still gets this theme. Like Legacy of the Force, I thought was a good story, despite some of the issues I may have with it. And maybe Karen Travis having a storyline that didn't need to be there. Just going to be honest. In fact, don't know if I said this multiple times. Yeah, I'm just going to post this. I did not know that. That sounds fascinating. Wow. I would like to read that. 1,000-page novella. Holy shit. That is something that I would love to read. Holy shit. Thank you for bringing that up, Alex Starr. Because that is something that I appreciate the fans of doing. Honestly, I actually one thing I will say though about Jason Solo, I actually think his storyline was, at least how he fell to the dark side, was more tragic than Anakin's because we spent a lot of time with Jason, a lot. Now you don't need to read the Young Jedi Knight books, but if you did, the the gut punched in the last book, Invisible. At the beginning of each chapter, there's like a quote of Jason's lines from throughout his, the younger part of his life, which goes to show just how much Jason has changed from when we first knew him. Legacy of the Force is a tragic story. And when you read the stuff that came prior to it, it's even more tragic. Though I still argue Legacy of the Force can be read without reading the other parts of the EU. Because I do think that the series stands completely on its own. As long as you have some knowledge on Star Wars, like you've watched the original films, I think Legacy of the Force can stand on its own. Because the great thing about the Star Wars expanded universe, there was a lot of starting points that were good for the EU. Though I think Fate of the Jedi is probably one of the worst starting points if you're starting to read the EU. Of course, I think Fate of the Jedi, to me, is one of the most underrated Star Wars stories. I mean, Fate of the Jedi was literally one of the most interesting things that Star Wars did since the New Jedi Order series. Because one thing you don't see Star Wars explore that much is the mystical side of the Force. You don't see like a spiritual quest being had in this series, and not to mention it actually connected stuff from earlier Star Wars stories that had not been connected for a long time. Like it resolved certain things and explained, okay, what happened to Kalissa? Because that character was never mentioned again after her appearance. Yet in Fate of the Jedi, we find out what happened to her. That one person that we meet in the Black Fleet Crisis that Luke ran into, we find out what happens to her. And Fate of the Jedi also introduced Abeloth, and not to mention, Fate of the Jedi made me appreciate the Mortis arc in TCW in a way. And of course, everyone's like, wait, what? Let me explain. The reason why I say this is because, okay, there's a mother. Sorry, not a mother. There's the father, the son, the daughter, but where's the mother? And I felt like it was beautiful how the EU explained that the mother once existed. And the thing that I love about it addressed the consequences of what happened in that episode. Because let's just say, ignore canon for a second. Let's say you only follow the EU. There really isn't really any consequences for what happened to these characters in those episodes. But Fate of the Jedi actually follows up on that and actually addresses, you know what? Anakin doing this is kind of a bad thing because in the future, who's going to stop Abeloth? It also added further consequences for what happened at the end of Legacy of the Force when Center Point Station was destroyed. So, in my opinion, Fate of the Jedi fixed some of the things I didn't really like about TCW that much and made me appreciate it more. Yes. And that's the thing I liked. My main issue with Rey restoring the Jedi Order is Luke has already done that in the EU. I think it's a story that's been told. It's done. It's been told. Move on. Do I think the prophecy of the chosen one being Anakin make sense in canon legends or the new canon? Huh. Um, I actually liked how the EU explained it because not everyone believed the chosen one prophecy was even real. There's multiple interpretations of it. And I think I prefer the way the EU did it over how canon does it because there's so many Jedi that just look at the Force in different ways. And I think like Luke's era of Jedi when they read about the chosen one prophecy, because mind you, the chosen one prophecy was introduced in the late 1990s, and by the time the Phantom Menace came out, Luke's Jedi Order was already established. So anything that happened that seemed to make no sense because of contradictions, was explained in further novels that majority of the records were destroyed. So yeah, and I think the Jedi like encountering something like the prophecy in Luke's era just makes more sense. That considering they didn't have the context of the prophecy, not to mention they didn't really believe in the prophecy. Hell, there was people in Anakin's time that didn't believe the prophecy was true. Now in canon, I think the canon does a good job of its own way of explaining Anakin being the chosen one. Or Ahsoka, I guess if there's one thing I will say, does reinforce that he's the chosen one. Do I think the chosen one was it really necessary? That is the question, though. I like to, you know, ask: is the chosen one really necessary? To be honest with you, if there's one thing I disagree with regarding George Lucas, is the chosen one. I don't think it should have ever been a thing, in my opinion. I don't think it hurts the lore, mind you. But if there's one trait I don't like about fiction at times is the chosen one trope. Now, I will give credit that it does subvert that trope by having the chosen one turned to evil. But consider the fact that we already know Anakin's going to be redeemed because of the original trilogy. I feel like having the prophecy of the chosen one just, I don't know. I really wish it was not introduced in Star Wars. Because I feel like it kind of goes against the themes of Star Wars. Because destiny, in my opinion, is a theme of Star Wars we see multiple times, and in my opinion, it doesn't exist. The chosen one prophecy just pushes a theme of Star Wars about destiny, and I don't believe there is such thing. Because that's how I interpret the Star Wars. Fair enough. That's just my opinion about it. It wasn't necessary. Though I don't hate it, I just don't think it was necessary. Dark Empire may not be the best Star Wars story. I'm not going to go around and say, like, sorry, I'm not going to go around and say, like, oh, it's such a great story. For me, Dark Empire is a product of its time. And I don't think it's fair blaming Dark Empire for things that the prequels later introduced. I just don't think it's fair. Dark Empire was published in the 1990s. There was no prequel trilogy. There was no Chosen One prophecy of Anakin being the Chosen One. There's no way the authors could have known there was a Chosen One prophecy. And I think that a lot of Star Wars fans do not appreciate what that story introduced to Star Wars. A lot of Force powers that we know from Star Wars would not exist without Dark Empire. A lot of the stuff that would be later introduced in the Knights of the Old Republic era was introduced through Dark Empire, like the holocrons, various Jedi Masters that were introduced, alluding to an ancient Sith war. Dark Empire also. Oh, but Palpatine got brought back. How can you defend it? I will defend Dark Empire on this. Palpatine coming back, I don't think ruins Vader's sacrifice. I think that's just stupid. Anyone that says that is just dumb. But oh wait, you're okay with it in Rise of Skywalker, but no, sorry, Rise, but Dark Empire, but not Rise of Skywalker. The difference is Dark Empire came out before there was a prequel trilogy. The Star Wars universe wasn't really that established. There was not that much material available. You had the West End game stuff. You had the Han Solo adventures, the Lando Calrissian adventures. You had Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And you were having the Thrawn trilogy getting published around the same time. There really wasn't much available at this point. Dark Empire was only going by what was already available at the time. Not to mention, I think Dark Empire explored an aspect of Luke's character that was done better than what was done in freaking the sequels. Like Luke Skywalker being tempted by the dark side. Like, we got to follow up on that. Leia actually gives Leia something to do because it's Leia that saved Luke. It goes to show you that Luke Skywalker can make some terrible mistakes, and those who actually save him are actually his loved ones. Like, Leia and Luke together defeated the Emperor. Like, Dark Empire also has some really great art, and I don't care. I know art is subjective. I love the art for Dark Empire, at least the first one. Had Dark Empire, the first one, been the only story in that trilogy to be published, I think it would have been. I think it would go down as an underrated classic, and I don't think it would got the hate that it got. My issue though is I don't think it needed a second or third installment. They're not terrible. I just didn't think they need to exist. And another thing about Dark Empire, I will give credit though. Kevin J. Anderson was like was the first author to connect the comics and the novels together, because before that they were kind of disconnected. Because Dark Empire, when you read the comic, you don't know if it's even a sequel to the Thrawn trilogy or it's connected to it. Yes, and Dark Empire is necessary if you want to understand the first few chapters of the Jedi Academy trilogy. And speaking of the Jedi Academy trilogy, I think there's an author that gets a lot of undeserved hate by EU fans, and that's Kevin J. Anderson. I think Kevin J. Anderson single-handedly made the Star Wars expanded universe as great as it was. No other author did what he did. He was the first to connect the novels and the comics together. Dark Empire was the first time a comic was referenced in the novel. So the novel and the comic were both on equal footing when it came to continuity. They weren't separate. Like, come on, let's be real. The Marvel comics, is there really a connection between them and Splinter or the Han Solo adventures or Lando Calrissian adventures? Not really. I think a lot of people disagree with you, because I think Mace Windu is awesome. Well, if we're going by the book Shatterpoint, but I think the movie itself, I guess. As for Thrawn, hold on, actually, and the new, hold on, sorry, I'm scattered brain right now. Okay, Thrawn. I think I'm going to address something about the character of Thrawn. Like, even though there's an expanded universe discussion, I'm trying to get this to an hour, so I might have to stretch this. I don't know how Thrawn is portrayed in Rebels. I haven't watched Rebels yet. I only know, based on what I've read from the first book in the Thrawn trilogy in the new canon and his characterization and the Thrawn Ascendancy books. From what I've read from Timothy Zahn, who wrote Thrawn, I think he's still good like he is in Legends, though I cannot comment on his portrayal in Rebels. If you want me to talk about Rebels sooner, vote for Rebels in the poll. Don't make me torture myself through Force Awakens, please. Yeah. Now, Timothy Zahn does deserve credit, but without Kevin J. Anderson, these minions will not have connected. Because it would be until the end of the 90s where Star Trek would start to adapt what Star Wars, did. Because the Star Wars expanded universe influenced the Star Trek expanded universe. Of course, for those of you who probably wondering, what the fuck are you talking about, Darth Sinovia? Well, in the late 1990s to the early 2000s, the Star Trek literary verse, which I'll call that to differentiate between the two, started to connect their stories together. It isn't just, oh, this author did a sequel to one of their stories. Because before the Star Wars expanded universe, Star Trek did not do what Star Wars did. There were stories that did reference each other, but it was mostly authors' other works. It wasn't authors referencing other authors' works. Now, what happened to Star Trek that made it actually do what Star Wars did? Well, in the early 2000s, for those of you who are Trekkies, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a program that the novels did, which relaunched every Star Trek book line. From Deep Space Nine to Voyager to Next Generation to Enterprise. All these series relaunched, and they're basically post-series literary fiction. And the reason why this is important, because the Star Wars Expanded Universe had some of the best continuity in a multimedia franchise. Star Trek just couldn't compete. Star Trek, yeah, you had stories that connect occasionally, but the universe, a lot of the novels just felt like episodes. Like, if you could basically pick up any novel as long as it's not part of a series, and basically, it's oh, what happened to this novel? It's over. That changed with the Deep Space Nine relaunch. You basically had with Star Trek what you had for Star Wars, though. Majority of this continuity for Star Trek were post-series stories. And up until Picard came out, you had some of the best tie-in fiction, some of the best, arguably, in history with Star Trek. That would have never been possible without Star Wars. And that's why the Star Wars EU deserves credit, because without Star Wars, the Star Trek EU would not have been as good as it was prior. Oh, yes. Star Wars, and I keep saying this, the EU was at its peak during 1999 to 2005. I say this because that's where you got the best Star Wars stories. Though you could argue 1991 to 2005, but for me, 1999 is that year we got Vector Prime, The Phantom Menace, all the stuff that tied into it. You had some of the best Star Wars comics. Like, my favorite comic series in Star Wars is Republic. Like, John Ostrander is in my opinion, when it comes to Star Wars writers, I would put him on the top 5 best Star Wars writers. Every single story he ever was involved in the prequel era was top tier. The Battle of Jabim, I don't know if he wrote that, but it was amazing. Obsession was an amazing story as well. Anything involving Quinlan Voss was amazing too. Of course, I'm not as familiar with the comics as I am with the novels, but the comics there's a lot of great stuff. Yeah, man, I can go on for another hour, but this stream will likely go into becoming something different. So I think I'll go on just for a little bit longer, because There's some stuff. Now, I guess you could. I guess if you were to ask me a question, though, if you want to ask me a question, oh, Golden Age of the Sith, pretty good stuff, actually. Now I know Tales of the Jedi isn't for everyone because some people may not be a fan of the art because it doesn't look like Star Wars to them. I disagree. I love like the fantastical look in that era, even though aesthetically it Knights of the Republic, the games contradict Tales of the Jedi, despite taking place by like about 2 to 3 decades prior to the game. It doesn't really look like an ancient civilization that existed, and there's just something about the ancient stuff, how the Tales of the Jedi, how those comics. I really love just how ancient the galaxy looked, the way the Jedi dressed, the way the planets looked. It was so good. Oh yes, amazing stuff. Tales of the Jedi is amazing stuff. I mean, it is peak comics. And again, Kevin J. Anderson, and I forgot the name of the author that worked on Dark Empire, also made some of the best Star Wars material ever. Those comics, they were sick. We would never see that today. Like it's just it's kind of strange. Am I the only thing it's strange how I just got an opinion. Do you guys find it strange how Dawn of the Jedi, despite being the most ancient era of Star Wars, looks more advanced than the early Tales of the Jedi comics? I just find it weird. Yes, he did. May he rest in peace. I don't know. I just find it strange that the Tales of the Jedi comics look more ancient in terms of aesthetic than Dawn of the Jedi, which should look even more um, ancient than that. Now, I don't hate Dawn of the Jedi. I'm just saying that for an era that takes place in the ancient past, for me, it should look way more ancient than it does. Oh, John Campia. I hate John Campia. Yeah, if there's one criticism I would have of Dawn of the Jedi, I've only read the first arc. I feel like if it takes place over 30,000 years into the past, I feel like majority of the technology that exists in that era should not exist. At least if it does, it should be very primitive. At least for Star Wars standards, it should be primitive. Yeah, if there's one thing I will say though, I when it comes to Star Wars, at least in my opinion, I feel like there's multiple dark ages that happen in the Star Wars universe. And by the way, I'm not. This is not lore accurate. I'm talking from an objective standpoint. If you look at like the eras where we read or the eras that we watch or play the games of, it seems like you're in a dark age, and at least in whatever era you're in. Like during the times of Exar Kun and Revan and all this other stuff. I think the Star Wars galaxy has gone through 4 or 5 dark ages. It doesn't just have one; it has multiple. And I think the bulk of the Star Wars franchise is in the dark age because I really do think like the era after Bane um, destroyed the Sith. I do feel like there was a golden age for a time, but that golden age didn't last because gradually the Republic declined. It got corrupt and became the Republic that we saw in the prequels. In my opinion, sometime before the prequels was the start of the Dark Age. And what we know about Star Wars, what we see on screen or what we read on a page, the Dark Age never truly ended. So I in a way, I do feel like we're in a technological dark age in the Star Wars universe. I mean, it's a really fucking dark place. The Star Wars universe are. Oh, Zane. Oh, that character is amazing. I've read every single comic of that series. It's a shame. I have the rest of his comics reviews on my fucking computer. I just have to get the fucking thing. Yeah. Well, I believe there was an equivalent of the High Republic era in the EU, but we never saw it. Like, there was an equivalent. But then again, why the fuck do we even. Okay, Darth Sinovia, don't rant about the new canon. Let's keep this EU. Yeah, sorry, I'm just. Because if I do this longer, I'm just going to rant about the new canon because this stream's going on for an hour. I don't know. I never read the comic. I just read the novel. Oh God, Vector Prime, an amazing book, one of the best Star Wars novels of all time. And you know what? Fuck all those fans that fucking drove Matthew Stover away. Not Matthew Stover. I mean, what the fuck? Scatterbrain. Um, R.A. Salvatore. Yeah, one of the best writers for the Star Wars universe, and he only wrote 2 books. I don't know if the Star Wars fan base drove him away, but I wouldn't be surprised. Even though he did not choose to kill Chewbacca, and I think he got undeserved hate for that, just like Troy Denning got undeserved hate for killing Anakin and Jason, and just like Karen Traviss, I don't. Not everyone here is a fan of her work. I don't think she should have gotten the hate for killing Mora Jade because that wasn't her call to make. I, I just don't think authors, unless they they have a huge authority over this stuff, should be blamed for all this bad stuff that happens. Yeah, I think George Lucas is overrated. I mean, without George Lucas, we would have Star Wars. But come on, can we all be objective here? The best Star Wars material is made by other people. Regardless how any of us feel about the Clone Wars by Dave Filoni, you got to admit a lot of there the clone episodes alone in sheer quantity are better than all the movies by George Lucas. Even if though Revenge of the Sith is probably one of my favorite Star Wars stories. I mean, come on. I just think a lot of the material done by other people is better than George. Oh yes, Vector Prime, such an amazing book. Now, I don't hate George Lucas. I love the man. I think he's done. Without him, there would be no Star Wars. But I think that a lot of the material that is better than what George Lucas could have done, and that's not a bad thing. George Lucas, he built this universe with the help of thousands of people, but there was more talented authors and more talented writers. I feel like that did a lot more with the Star Wars universe than George Lucas ever could. And I don't buy in. Oh, he's the creator, so everything he made is gold. It isn't. I mean, if you just compare like, okay, I'm just going to like compare them. I'll ask the audience here. What do you think is better? The Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, or when it comes to stories regarding the Clone Wars, or the various other shows, games, books, and comics in the Clone Wars era? Who told better Clone Wars era stories? Honestly, I don't. Okay, I gotta address this thing right now. I don't care what George Lucas had in mind for the sequels. I don't care. I really don't care because let's be real with ourselves. It would have never been as good as the EU. It would never been as good. And I know it's like, oh, you're being a Dark Synovia, of course. You're being an EU zealot. You're being an EU fanboy. Of course you're going to say that. I'm just going to be real. The EU set the bar too fucking high for me to really want a sequel trilogy, to really not get disappointed. Now, if there was a brand new era post Rise of Skywalker that is actually good in terms of writing and characters, we wouldn't have anything to compare it to. The problem is everything Disney Star Wars has done so far, we can compare it to something that came before, and a lot of that material is just better than anything that Disney's put out so far. Knights of the Old Republic 2 is one of the best Star Wars stories ever. It is amazing. Hell, I forgot that Dark Valklor, I think that's his name. He did a great series of movies based on Knights of the Old Republic 2. If you're wondering, there's I think there's two people. They're planning on doing a crossover with Knights of the Old Republic. One person did their own Knights of the Old Republic movies, which basically they just edited the Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2 games into feature-length films. Some of them you have them like 3 or 4 hours long. I might give a link to them sometime. They're excellent stuff. If you don't mind watching a movie with outdated, graphics from the 6th generation. Amazing stuff. Fans themselves still make good Star Wars content. It isn't that difficult to look. And those Knights of the Old Republic films, they've existed for almost a decade. Some of them have. Let's see, Revenge of the Sith novel. Oh, yes. I mean, KOTOR 2, basically, in my opinion, it is such a good story. It's such a shame that game has gotten some of the worst treatment. You know what? Since this is EU related, I'm just gonna go on a fucking tangent. Fuck Aspire for promising the restored content mod and not give us those fucking content mods. Fuck them. Those bastards promised us the restored content mod and we got nothing. We didn't get shit. The Switch version is not only a shitty port of Knights of the Old Republic 2, it's not even competent. It needed an update. And I'm speaking as someone that one of the unfortunate suckers that bought the fucking thing. I literally had to use cheats to beat the game because there was one section in Knights of the Old Republic 2 I couldn't fucking complete because the game was a glitchy fucking piece of shit on the Switch. I never had issues completing on Alderaan, the part where you basically go to the palace. I never had issues with that in the original Xbox version, but the fucking Switch version was fucking a piece of shit. No, not everything on the Switch is bad. Not all Switch versions are bad ports. That's just one of the exceptions. Knights of the Old Republic 1 was a competent port. I had no issues with it. Yeah, there's some nitpicks I could say, but Knights of the Old Republic 1 never crashed on me. I was able to complete the game just fine. It didn't crash. It didn't fucking stop at a certain section of the game. I'm just seriously, fuck Aspire for what they've done to Knights of the Old Republic. They lied to us. They gave us a fucking shitty port of one of the greatest Star Wars games of all time. We could not have simply got a good port so that we could simply just, I can play this on the Switch. Oh, I can play the content mod. Boom. And the only way you could fucking play Knights of the Old Republic 2, the good version, how Obsidian originally intended, you literally have to fucking play it on the PC. And there's no problem with it playing it on PC. No problem with it at all. If you have a PC that can play Knights of the Old Republic 2, fuck the Switch version. Don't bother with it. Save yourself some money. The Switch version is a fucking over fucking priced port. Yes, though I'm not a fan of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, it's still an amazing story, nevertheless. Yeah, I really don't really care. Really, they're just concepts regarding George Lucas's sequel trilogy. It's just concepts, and I just don't think we should take them with a grain of salt. Yeah, they still look good. Yeah, since this is EU related, yeah, not shocked. Is anyone shocked that the Knights of the Old Republic remake is canceled? I'm not. And considering how fucking the modern gaming industry, how the game probably would have been a bad game anyway, the remake. It's a remake that didn't need to exist. Like, yeah, people have been asking for a remake, whatever. But do we really need one? Do we really need a remake of Knights of the Old Republic? We don't need one. The game's fine as it is. It's a classic. It's like not all fucking not all masterpieces need a remake. Uh, and I'm just gonna say this. I'm not sorry. I'm just gonna say this. Knights of the Old sorry, new age gamers, for those of you or those who just are turned off by a game because of these mechanics are dated or the graphics are dated. Fuck you. Seriously, there's many amazing games from the sixth console generation that have great like mechanics that have not been replicated in later games, such as like sorry, maybe I shouldn't like their example like Jedi Knight or Jedi Academy, whatever. We're in Gen 9, yet in the Jedi Fallen Order games, when you use a lightsaber, it doesn't actually cut anyone like in half, or a limb can't be chopped off, or their head. Like a lightsaber is supposed to be able to cut through almost anything, yet the only game that really captures lightsaber combat and actually captures it in a way that is actually, what we would see in the movies or the books or the comics. It's in a game with outdated mechanics, yet a game from the sixth console generation for some reason has better lightsaber combat mechanics than a game that came out a few years later called The Force Unleashed, where, oh yeah, I'm Starkiller, I'm just going to slash a stormtrooper, but they're like, oh wait, they're still in one piece, even though you sliced them a few times. Yes. I don't know. That's a hard question to even answer. Yes. Of course, there's also game people that don't game anymore but still have that mentality. Did EU authors believe that the EU would not be canceled because Sword of the Jedi would have come out in 2014 or 15? It's hard to say. We don't know because these authors are probably under a non-disclosure agreement, so they can't actually talk about if these works would have ever came out. Now, I don't believe Sword of the Jedi anything was really written beyond a rough draft. We don't know what the trilogy would have been like. I think I forgot the name of this author. I think that you could find their works on fanfiction.net or archive your own. But there is a author out there that is writing like continuations of the EU, but they're doing and ending it in fan fiction form. Because I honestly feel like at this stage, fan fiction is the only way you're gonna get any closure with the EU. And I don't find any issue with fan fiction, honestly. Because if fan fiction's the only way you're going to get closure, then fine. Though I personally don't want to write Star Wars fan fiction myself because the body of work that's required. I would say if I want to make a continuation of the EU, I would literally need a fucking encyclopedia on my side, like checking facts. Okay, this happened in this book, this happened in that comic, this happened in this book, this happened in that book. I'm writing fan fiction myself right now. I won't reveal it because I probably will never reveal where I'm posting my stories because that is private for me. It's something I do on my as a pastime. I literally have to look up facts every single time when I'm struggling with something, like a name of a location, a name of an ability that someone has. This kind of stuff is a lot of work. If you truly are serious about writing good fan fiction, you actually have to make sure you have a cyclopedia of whatever you're writing a fan fiction of on you at all times. And for Star Wars' case, you would need multiple cyclopedias. If you're fortunate to have some of the source books on you, if you don't, you're going to have a bunch of stuff. That's why I'm saying I do not envy anyone that's trying to end the EU through fan fiction, because constantly having to check your facts to make sure you don't get anything wrong is something that's just not appealing to me. If I'm writing a fan work of something, I I don't want to have to freaking read a encyclopedia each time, especially for if it's something like Star Wars, which has a body of work that's so fucking massive that you have to fact check it every single time. As it is, you have to basically. I'm speaking from experience as someone who's doing it. Reread, proofread everything I write when it comes to every chapter. When I'm done reading a chapter, basically, my stories that I publish, I'm not going to reveal where I'm doing it because I don't want people to know my screen name wherever I post my stuff. Some of them may have already found it and they may not know it. For me, I care about my integrity as a writer. And if I were to do Star Wars stories, my own Star Wars fan fictions, I would always have to have a cyclopedia on me so I don't get certain facts wrong about a character, about, oh, this character is able to do this character is not able to do that, oh, this character is skilled at doing this, oh, this character is skilled at doing that, or this character can use this force ability, or this character has this force ability, or this person was here at this location at this point in time in this story. So for me, if I were just going to do a fan fiction of Star Wars, I won't ever do one. I'd rather just have the creative freedom just to write whatever story I want. And if I do write a fan fiction, I'd rather just do it for facts about a character's, like, their biography, their abilities, or vice versa. That's the reason I would do a Star Wars fan fiction, at least if I were to do it. Anyway, I can't talk about fan fiction Star Wars, but anyway, I just had to bring that up. Now, I know people who are watching this, not everyone here who watches my stuff, read the EU. I understand that, and some may find it interesting that I'm talking about a part of the Star Wars universe they have never experienced. I'm not saying this lightly. I feel bad for you. There's a lot of stories you have yet to experience, and if you have the time to do so, there's a lot of stories. There's many, many stories in the expanded universe you could read for yourself. Now, not everything is going to be for you. You don't even have to read that much of the EU. You can read a few stuff here and there, and that's fine. Are you the person that prefers to read short stories? You could find that. I mean, Star Wars Timeline, I think that's what it's called. I think Star Wars Legends Timeline.com has a timeline for every Legends work that's ever existed. And they have some unreleased stuff as well. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in the EU and a lot of bad stuff too, obviously. I mean, it's literally inevitable to have trash. If you're interested in the slimy side of the Star Wars universe, there's some stories I recommend. The Tales of Jabba's Palace, Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales of the Bounty Hunters. If you're interested in, learning what happens in between Empire and Return of the Jedi, there's always Shadows of the Empire, you're interested in some crazy stuff in Star Wars and don't really care, and you're kind of into like campy science fiction, I'd read the classic Marvel comics and the classic era. Are you interested in stuff that has nothing to do with the characters from the movies and you want to be so far removed? You could go back to the Tales of the Jedi comics. There's a lot of stuff. I appreciate that, honestly. I'm glad my review's done something because most people don't pay attention to them anymore. It's kind of one of the reasons I don't do them as often anymore. I mean, I don't want to get into any drama because it's not something I really want to talk about, but those of you probably don't know, I used to follow someone like Matt Wilkins, a big EU fan. He was someone that I looked up to at one point. I used to be a frequent viewer of his. What happened? Well, Fandom Menace. Not going to get into too deep into that because I don't think any of us want to talk about those losers. We had a disagreement. His audience that watched me jumped ship, left, and my bulk of my audience left. But I don't have regrets though, because I know those who truly appreciated my content are still here. And if I helped people get back into the EU or I helped people keep their love of Star Wars alive, then you know what? I succeeded in a small way of helping people. Sorry. Yes, the Crystal Star. One day, I'm going to read that whole damn thing, not skim through it. Read that whole damn thing, analyze it. I can't believe I've read fucking. Okay, not read. Crystal Star. I have 2 copies of the Crystal Star, a hardback and a paperback. You know, it would be hilarious though is in the Essential Legends series. Imagine Lucasfilm decides, you know what would be funny to troll EU fans? Let's release the Crystal Star with a better cover this time. I mean, the Crystal Star in itself, the story would not be bad if it was a Star Trek novel. But Luke, Han, and everyone else just fell out of character. Yeah, but you gotta know I do a lot of political content though. They don't care about that. They just want to watch my Star Wars stuff. Then that's fine. But just a word of warning. Thank you. And you know what? What I said in my stream, on my other channel, on Fantifa, this is what I mean. When it comes to things, if you're not able to connect with people outside your political tendency, if people cannot see you as a human being first, then how the fuck am I supposed to connect with people in Star Wars? Because Star Wars, a lot of people love Star Wars, whether it's the movies, the comics, vice versa. And if people cannot see me as beyond, I'm not even going to mention it here because that's not what the stream is about. But if I can't get people to look past that, maybe it's like, you know what? Maybe I don't 100% agree with what he pushes, but at least we can connect somewhere. If you're not able to connect to anybody in any way, you have no business doing what you're doing. And that situation, honestly, B-Level was just someone that's a relic from that day. And don't feel bad for that. I'm beyond caring. Matt Wilkins and we went our separate ways. I made peace with that. I really have. I don't particularly, I'm not particularly happy with it. What's really frustrating is I did watch some of his videos after the fact, and I do believe he still does good videos. He probably still does. I don't know. I haven't watched him in years. Honestly, when it comes to the new canon, I think since I'm at the end of this stream, I might as well just talk about it for a bit. Majority of the stuff when it comes to the new canon, I don't. It's very limited. My exposure to it outside the shows. I mean, there are some good stories, but other than prequel era related books, I don't particularly care for the comics. Nice to see you show up here, Max Panther, one of my oldest fan. Letting you know, this Max Panther has been with me for a very long time, almost a decade. He's one of my oldest fan. So to say hi, everyone who not seen him before. Like examples, like if I do talk about the new canon books, it's only going to be individual stuff that I find interesting. Like after I'm done reading the last book of the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, I'm going to do a video about it because there's a lot I have to say. Like, because I think that those books, I think they're good. The Thrawn Ascendancy books are probably some of the best Star Wars novels that have been written so far in this decade. I mean, I think Timothy Zahn does a really, no matter if you're reading Legends or canon, I'm just letting people know here. He is really good at character writing. He's good at writing political thrillers. He's good at writing political drama, military drama. For me, that to me is what Star Wars is for me. And I think the Ascendancy trilogy, if you're not a fan of the new canon, but you're looking for some good material, you cannot go wrong with Timothy Zahn. Everything that Timothy Zahn writes, even his worst Star Wars books, in my opinion, are still something that you could still read and enjoy. Because Timothy Zahn, love him or hate him, is really good at writing military science fiction. He's good at writing, characters, making them feel like real people. He's really good at writing politics in the Star Wars universe to make it feel real. In fact, if there's an argument why I think the Thrawn Ascendancy series should be read, even if you're not an EU fan, it explores an aspect of the Star Wars universe that isn't explored, the unknown regions. And for those Star Wars fans out there, you know what I'm talking about. The unknown regions, unexplored territory in the Star Wars universe. It's very rare we actually go to the unknown regions. The unknown regions is where the Ascendancy trilogy takes place. I'll get more into detail about that. There isn't really any human characters in this trilogy. It's just aliens. And it's not very often that we get a series of novels that focus strictly on non-human characters. And that, to me, is why I would recommend reading it. If you're looking for something different in Star Wars, whether you like the new canon or not, the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy is worth reading. But I'm going to have to elaborate on it more when I'm done with it. It's been a long time since I started reading them because, to me, you don't get good books like this very often anymore in Star Wars in general. When I read the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, it feels like I'm reading a classic expanded universe story. Brotherhood. Are you a fan of Labyrinth of Evil? If you're a fan of the Labyrinth of Evil novel and you're a fan of the Clone Wars series, you'll likely enjoy it. But even if you're not a fan of the Clone Wars, I think it's a good book. In my opinion, I consider that a pseudo legends book. Now, I'm saying this that's someone that's strictly EU. It's one of the rare exceptions. I could recommend this story. If you want to like learn more about you know the Nemorians' culture, you want to see them in a different light, so it's not kind of stereotypical like they're portrayed in other Star Wars media. If you want to learn more about alien cultures, this is a good novel to read. Not to mention, it actually makes me be more accepting towards Anakin training Ahsoka as his Padawan, because I feel like this novel actually, unlike other stories that take place prior to TCW but takes place after Episode 2, we don't see Anakin around another youngling. And I feel like this story, having Anakin around another youngling before Ahsoka, does showcase, yeah, Anakin has the potential to be a Jedi Master to another. And I do think it's a really good book, even if you're not a fan of the new canon. I think it stands completely on its own. I consider a pseudo legends novel, and the author who worked on the novel actually, the way they wrote it, it could fit with Labyrinth of Evil. So if you're just curious, don't take my word for it. Just read it for yourself. I consider it a good book. And also, if you are a fan of Obi-Wan, it does him really good. Oh, see. Okay, sorry. Just okay. Okay, I want to hold on. I'm actually going to. Yeah, why do you dislike the High Republic? I did a video on it already, but since I don't expect everyone to watch my other videos, I'll just make this as quickly as possible and brief. I don't like the High Republic because I think the stories are just boring. I just don't think it's that interesting. Any good stuff that you do have in it's just buried with the crap. I just feel like the era would be far more interesting if it actually showed the Jedi's being more flawed as individuals rather than just making them the paragons of good. Because I just feel like the Jedi are at their most interesting when they're doing stuff that is not necessarily like something you would expect from Jedi. Because the thing that made the Jedi interesting in the EU is they were hypocrites. They did have darker tendencies to their organization, and I feel like the High Republic Jedi were just too perfect in my opinion. And not to mention, I think the idea of having a 16-year-old girl being a jet, basically already having a Padawan, just no. And I just don't like how the Jedi are in that era. And not to mention, when you haven't read if you didn't read the EU, you wouldn't notice this, but I just don't find the Jedi interesting in this era because yeah, we get this Jedi sees the Force through music, and this Jedi sees the Force in another way, I just feel like we don't really get any interesting discussions on the Force, and I think the Force is just not interesting in the High Republic, and the Nihil as villains, they not to mention I just feel like the politicians in the High Republic era, I just cannot stand them. I think Star Wars is at its best when politicians are portrayed as fucking bastards, because to me, Star Wars has made me wary of politicians. Politicians are scum, and I think if you portray politicians in a positive light, that's anti-Star Wars, and that's a reason I don't like the High Republic. Ross Feria, amazing character, fucking awful person, hate the bastard. I think I think he's one of the greatest Star Wars characters, and I would love to see him adapted in some way, even if it's through another character. I haven't read the entire trilogy, so you'll have to get back to me when I have. So I cannot say. I don't know. This topic is shifting towards the new canon, so I think I'm going to conclude this video because if I continue going on, I'm going to talk about the new canon more than the EU. So I'll just my closing thoughts on the EU regarding this discussion. I think the expanded universe is one of the most fascinating things in the Star Wars universe. I mean, I did like I wanted to talk about it because hey, I haven't done a Star Wars topic in a while. Let's get it out of the way so I can at least have something for my fans to watch. Those who haven't had the opportunity to watch this live, I'm just going to let you know. For those of you who want me to talk about Rebels or rant about The Force Awakens for the 30th time, make sure to vote in the polls. Now, I'm giving you an additional 3 days. If in 3 days, no matter what the outcome of the poll, I will honor it. And if I have to suffer through Force Awakens, don't be surprised if I rant about the movie for 2 hours. But if Rebels wins, which I would rather watch Rebels, at least I'll be watching something I haven't experienced before. But for Rebels, don't expect a rant on Rebels. I'm just going to watch the show as is, talk about the first season, the good and the bad, and then give my fair judgment. Mind you, it will be you, the audience, that will be motivating me to watch Rebels because I don't want to make myself into a liar. I still have a 2003 TMNT review that I have yet to fucking promise to deliver on, which that will probably be a poll after the next one. And what format would you want me to talk about it in? Because I have yet to review it, and to me, that's a crime. One of my favorite cartoons, and I still have yet to talk about it. Anyway, the next video will be either Force Awakens and Rebels. Make sure to vote if you don't want me to talk about The Force Awakens again. Vote for Force Awakens. Anyway, later, folks. May the Force be with you, and see you next time with another video.